Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. A little bit insane. I have 77 slides. I know I have 20-ish minutes. I was thinking I would summarize about 10 years of progress to you and how to use social media data to measure psychological constructs. There's a lot of social media. It is now a fraction of the world population. You can quibble over overlap and exactly what medium, but it is most of it is text. And so a lot of sciences, including the social sciences, are moving into mining this kind of data and getting population insight from this data. And so there's been some progress over the years. Little shout out to where this work is from. So we're a consortium. I don't want to give you the impression that this is all me. So this is done across 3 labs, and graduate students at 3 labs contributed to this work. This is Tiffany at my lab, Sid at Andrew Schwartz's lab at Stony Brook, and then Sal at the University of Pennsylvania, who did most of the heavy lifting on the work. Okay, so seems like all the animations are off. Here's where we were in the last 10 years, right? So, or we're still people, when they tend to do these analysis where they start. You take random Twitter feeds, you take random data sets like this, and then you apply some simple language model, like a sentiment model, to get some well-being estimate. And then where we are now is that we no longer treat Twitter as a sort of magical bag of language, but we treat Twitter as a collection of individuals. And we may characterize these individuals individually using machine learning. You get the age, the gender, the income, the education. We start correcting for sample biases. We start using the same methods that Gallup uses or the BRFSS uses to get weighted estimates at some level of geographical aggregation. And then finally, where we're moving now is we have digital cohort samples or different digital panel studies where we follow people over time. I'm going to walk you through these 3 different generations of studies to give you a sense of how far the field has come as a whole. Okay, so basic idea of basic Twitter population monitoring, right? So you take the tweets, you aggregate them geographically, and then you extract language features, which is sort of you extract word counts. You feed that into some sort of machine learning model, and then you say, now you have the words from every county in the US, and you build some sort of cross-sectional, cross-validated machine learning model to predict heart disease or something like this. So this is sort of what this looks like. So we did this in 2015 for heart disease. Heart disease is bad. We care about not having heart disease. So you have counties. From the counties, you have tweets. Why Twitter? Twitter is public. And Twitter is pretty easy on the privacy end because the people who write tweets know that it's sort of intended to go out to the world. It's much less laborious than, say, Facebook data collection or something like this, which we also do, but that requires informed consent at the individual level. And then we aggregate, we geo-aggregate, we find out where these tweets were sent from, either using GPS coordinates or based on what they write in their profile. And then we get, say, death and mortality rates from death certificates from the CDC, the CDC Wonder. Then we go through this simple language extraction pipeline. In this case, we model topics. These are semantically coherent clusters of language. And then we do sort of the equivalent in the language space of a genome-wide association study. We try every language feature at a time as a predictor of the heart disease variable across counties. Yeah, so you have the vector of these little language clusters, and then you have the outcome, and then you try them one by one, and then you pull out those that in the Manhattan plot would rise to a Bonferroni corrected significance. And if you do this for heart disease, you get markers of you get markers of interpersonal tension. So these little things you're seeing are topics, semantically coherent clusters of words. It's sort of think of it as a factor analysis in the language space. It's a dimensionality reduction in the language space. You see a lot of curse words that mark sort of aggression. And then you also see the sort of boredom fatigue component. These are all robust to controlling for income and education at the county level. These survive controlling for income and education. And then if you look at lower risk, again, this is all cross-sectional, at the community level, the people tweeting are not the people dying. The people tweeting live in the communities where there are elevated rates of heart disease. It's an indirect proxy of community level exposures, right? They are indexed by language use on Twitter. You see markers of socioeconomic status for lower risk. You see people having positive experience of social buffering hypothesis a little bit, right? I mean, you have social quality of experience being negatively associated with risk. And then you see sort of an optimism resilience component, bit of a cognitive goal pursuit component. I should say that a lot of what you see here is also borne out in individual level longitudinal studies, which are obviously a lot better suited to getting at causality, right? This is a ecological level replication of this kind of work, of these kinds of findings. So now that we've teased out these language patterns, what we can do is you can take all of this and you can put it into machine learning prediction model. And then you can say, just based on Twitter, how well could I predict the heart disease of a community? And how much variance in heart disease of a community is accounted for by what's going on in the language. And you can bake that off against different predictors, right? So you can say, how well can I do this on data that the models haven't seen, on holdout data, compared to what the truth is. And so on the left, you see what's on death certificates. On the right, you see the Twitter predictions. These are all held out counties in the cross-validation framework. Well, how good is this?
That looks very good, doesn't it?
Well, maps are misleading because maps are always the same. But thank you. So, but sort of here's sort of Framingham-esque risk factors. No, I mean, how well does this bake off? Here are demographic predictors, here are health predictors, here are socioeconomic predictors. Here's a standard model that will combine all of these predictors. And this is how well Twitter does by itself. And when you combine Twitter with these other ones, what you see is that Twitter accounts for socioeconomic status and then has a sliver of sort of independent variance that is not already sucked up by income and education and these other variables. So Twitter is also really good at predicting income and education of communities. And it does this sort of on the way to its prediction. And then we replicated this because we were being heckled by somebody. And then we replicated this on 2012, 2013 data. Completely different Twitter data, completely different outcome data. Not sure why the outcome data doesn't do as well, but Twitter does exactly as well. It's sort of indistinguishable in performance across the two time spans and the two data sets. Yeah, so for heart disease now, we've seen, there is something going on in the community context, and you can use Twitter to look into the community context in this data-driven fashion, do this sort of genome-wide association study for behaviors, and it captures a fair amount of heart disease variance, right? And then we repeated this. We did this with life satisfaction based on Gallup data. Not to the Gallup person, yeah, you go. Right, so it works pretty well. It adds over and above log household income. We made a map. Then we made another map. We replicated this all in Spanish. We started working with the Mexican government, who, big shout out, they're absolutely wonderful to work with, who started about 5 years ago with independent Twitter data collection. Fun fact, it turns out that the GPS tags of the tweets was actually a very sensitive measure of cross-border traffic. Right, so you see the road network here in the US map, in Mexico mapped, and then of course you see Texas. They use it to track tourism flows. So this is a good example of sort of a positive unintended consequence. You give a statistics department a capability and they're like, oh, okay, now we know what to do with it. Always wanted to see how tourists travel in our country, right? And do this in real time. This is from last night. So this has been developed into this life map here of the sentiment of Twitter in Mexico. This is up. So we're done, right? No, right? So we haven't talked about sample biases. We haven't talked about stability, reliability. We haven't talked about external validity. So what's the key idea here? The key idea is if this was what we did in the beginning, right? This is what I just showed you. What we do now is this. We take the data set, by the way, just went up by order of 10. We no longer think about the world in terms of tweets. We think about them in terms of people. And our data set has 5 million Twitter users in it. That's 1.4% of the US population, something like that. And we have independent work, developed language models to predict age, gender, income, and education from the language that people use. So what we can do now is we can apply the language model to the language from the people and get their age, income, education, and gender language estimated. And then as we aggregate to the county level, we can do this, we can run this through a post-stratification pipeline, right? We can say, oh, look, older people are underrepresented on Twitter. Let's make sure we weigh them more heavily when they do show up in the data, right? And the beauty is the data set is big enough that you have at least some representation in these tails of these distributions. Median age on Twitter is only 2 years different than the median age of the US population. The main bias in Twitter data is that urban areas are oversampled and higher education areas are oversampled. Okay, so how well does this pipeline work? This is, again, a genome-wide association study for language, right? So these are the words and phrases most predictive of higher life satisfaction. And you see it is being part of the super creative class, right? I mean, it's being in this room. It's being at conferences. It's a lot of our instead of I, right? It's sort of community focused. So I should say, so the larger the word, the more predictive. This is a short list of correlations. The larger the word, the more predictive it is of higher life satisfaction. And then the color index is frequency. You should never make word clouds based on frequency, because it violates the Zipfian distribution of language. It's basically a tautology in linguistics. Don't do it. Always use something else. If you do word cloud, use something like correlation or some other feature importance metric, right? So compare this to happiness. So this is the language that predicts at the county level Gallup happiness, right? These are experiences. On the right, you see experiences, people being excited. There's weekends happening. There's our language. People having things that they get congrats for, right? So notice that the model doesn't know any theory, right? The model knows a life satisfaction score and a happiness score measured through single items. And then it pulls out from the detritus of social media, it pulls out all the emotions, thoughts, and behaviors that predict higher scores at the community level. You can cluster this differently. You can say what predicts higher life satisfaction. It looks like careers. It looks like recreation. It looks like a lot of social drinking and eating. America is a language of foodies. If you run these clustering algorithms over US Twitter, you get 35 topics that just talk about different kinds of restaurants, all of which are correlated with life satisfaction. But you also see a sort of a focus in larger ideas. Sometimes this is referred to as being a member of the super creative class, which I sort of like as a summary. And then just how does this pair with the literature, just in terms of a validity check, right? So the participation and engagement, social activities, travel and recreation, goal pursuit and achievement, all associated with life satisfaction. This is all correlational. Let me just say it again. This is correlational at the community level, right? Not making claims about causality. This is population monitoring. Okay, so if we think, okay, so what it picks up makes sense, right? It's sort of consistent with our expectation. Well, how well can we pick it up? Right, so we do a cross-validation framework. We train on part of the data. We hold data out. We use the data that we predict, that we trained on, to build a model, and then we apply it to new data the model hasn't seen. There's a footnote here about spatial autocorrelation, which we take care of in more recent work. It surprisingly doesn't make that much of a difference because counties aren't independently distributed, right? They're sort of adjacent sometimes, and you want to sort of tell the model about this. So we evaluate the model performance by saying, okay, what's the Twitter prediction, just like we did with heart disease, what's the Twitter prediction compared to what Gallup tells us the life satisfaction is? This is how well log household income predicts life satisfaction. This is how well a standard pipeline predicts this without this post-stratification, user-level aggregation. And this is how well the user level aggregation pipelines predict. And by the time you weigh this by population, so you take into account that your estimates are better in more populous areas, you're at a 0.7 here. Okay. You're at a 0.7. Okay. Then external convergent validity. I will speed up a little bit. So this is a surprising kicker, right? So we get these Twitter measures of life satisfaction, and with these Gallup measures of life satisfaction, we built the Gallup measures. Sorry, we built the Twitter measures on the Gallup data as training data. And now, how well does it predict these external variables? And look at this kicker. So our social media-based proxy for life satisfaction predicts external variables better than the Gallup ground truth it was trained on. This is not obvious why this is the case. We think now it has to do because it's multiple time points per person, right? We're aggregating over years of language use. The machine learning helps. It sort of takes out the pieces of the survey responses that are most dependable in signal, right? So there is just a data cleaning that happens as part of this process. But you go up, because of the density, the Twitter data density being so much higher, it ends up that the proxy is more robust than the original unit of measurement, which is quite surprising. Okay, then how stable is this? We split the data based on some sort of threshold metrics. And this is how well Gallup correlates with Gallup over 2 time spans. This is how well Twitter correlates with Twitter. Right? So you want it to be stable, but not too stable, so it can measure some sort of change in principle. And then how does it aggregate? So the prior World Happiness Report made a good point in the big data chapter that a lot of the quality of these methods depend on your choice of geographic aggregation, right? And so counties, MSAs, metropolitan statistical areas, cities, and states are all areas at which policy can be made in principle. And so if we aggregate this up, we get higher accuracies, as you would expect, as you sort of, right, you reduce variance as you aggregate up. Just if you're curious, here are the cities with the highest life satisfaction. We've got a quirky face here because it's down the street from us and we don't believe it. These are college towns. And then if you look at the lowest life satisfaction, I don't know what's going on in Las Vegas that justifies this. Well, I don't want to know, right? You have sort of industrial centers. So there's a distinction. Rather than income, education is actually more distinguishing at the county level between high and low life satisfaction. And then, okay, you've done this in the US. Can you replicate this in a different country? So we've done this in the UK. We've gotten a Twitter data set in the UK. We've gotten well-being from the ONS. And then we train the same model. We do the same cross-validation system. And then it works on a data set that's about 10% as big as the US data set. Okay, so that's pretty well. So this is generation 2 now of these methods, right? I showed you generation 1, that was the heart disease. Generation 2, this is this post-stratification and stabilization pipeline. So are we done? Not quite, right? So what about the temporal predictions? Everything I showed you right now was cross-sectional, was in space. And I can tell you that if you've been following the literature for the last 10 years, temporal Twitter predictions are extremely noisy. Right? You see, and I'll show you an example here. I think it's coming up. But our key idea is, and again, this is obvious in hindsight, but it took us 10 years, is to follow the same people over time. If you want to describe change in a population, aggregate over the within-person changes in your cohort, in your panel, as opposed to always taking a new random sample from the population at every slice. The way Twitter is being used changes, Twitter composition changes, there is semantic drift, right? The composition of social media changes, the way language use changes, and so we do this. And here is sort of, here if you think about a space-time matrix, where can we get resolution, right? With spatiotemporal methods. I just sort of marked the cells for which Gallup provides weights, post-stratification weights. So to make sure that the distribution of respondents that you have in some way can be mapped onto some sort of ground truth population distribution, say from the census. And we think we can move into the bluish quadrants, if you can see that. And we're particularly keen, or I'm particularly keen, I should say, on the month county quadrant, because that's where our population health collaborators tell us we could look at low birth weights or other sort of outcomes that might be really, really interesting to track shocks that are going on in the population. Okay, so let me make the point about the noisy signal. So this is one of these findings, right? So this is a simple Gen 1 Twitter sentiment timeline. And you see here what I mean about the noisy, right? So the murder of George Floyd was the most negative event ever recorded on social media by a number of different labs. But also note Christmas Day here, right? So was Christmas Day as positive as this murder was negative? No. It's an artifact of language, right? So Merry will show up as in Merry Christmas, will show up in your generation 1 language model as a positive word. And so it gets captured by these methods. And so here's sort of a generation 1-2 example from a recent World Happiness Report where you at least derive these indicators separately for men and women and then combine them again. The purple line is the ground truth putatively. The yellow and blue lines here are social media-based indicators. And then if you use our generation 3, follow the same people over time method, the slide got dropped. Let me see if it's in there. Nope, it got dropped. But it's in here in small. If you see this one, if you look at this one here, at the top here, you see Twitter-based estimate of depression, LBA's language-based assessment. And at the bottom here, you see Gallup sadness scores following the tracking, the post-COVID tracking survey effort. Thank you for that. It was a great effort. And so where we're moving with this is we're trying to strengthen these methods for quasi-experimental inference. So difference in difference design and longitudinal discontinuity designs so that we can really look at shocks and reliably look at changes in time series in a way that we can use for inference. Thank you very much. Lots of hands.
On the Twitter data, is that a unique identifier that's publicly available, or do you just infer that in some way when you're doing the panel cohort of Twitter users?
Yep, Twitter handles are public. And there's APIs, so there's endpoints. Your computer talks to their computer, gets a random feed. You can build up a sample of user handles, and then you can go back to the Twitter API and you can say, for this user, give me their last 3,200 tweets.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In terms of Christmas, I was just going to say that irrespective of Merry Christmas and Happy Christmas confusing the model, Christmas is always just a giant peak if you plot the time series data when people are just responding on a scale. So I wouldn't entirely rule out that people enjoy Christmas. I suspect that it's a very large number of people are not working.
I retract my dissing of Christmas.
Yeah, no, I mean, it may not be as big as this, but in our data it's huge.
Yeah.
And the other thing I was going to say is, so in the data that we collect, we also have a sample that's not representative. And I think sometimes in our data we just don't have enough people at all in some cells to weight.
Yeah.
But even if we did, I mean, on the one hand, obviously this works because the cross-validation says it's effective. But do you not worry that, for example, much older people who wouldn't normally be using Twitter, older people who are on Twitter are presumably not that representative of older people?
100%, yes. I think that's a good problem to have. I call it a second-order concern, right? I mean, it's like, yes, that's right. There's something off, right? Or, yeah, the 80-year-old on Twitter is different from your average 80-year-old. Yeah, that's right. On the right.
Kind of off the back of what you just said, from my perspective, as technically still a teenager, Twitter is fairly irrelevant for most of us.
Yeah.
Most of us aren't on Twitter.
Yeah.
Same with Facebook, it's just kind of we have to for uni. But like moving over to sort of different types of social media, like Snapchat,
like Snap,
TikTok.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Some of these things, well, Snapchat to a point, but it's kind of video and photo based.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of envisage the future? in terms of this sort of work?
Yeah, we have to sort of go with the cohorts and where they go. We have the first data collection running on TikTok. It's very compute intensive. We've run studies on Instagram using Instagram as signal. Instagram contains about half as much signal as text. Images say about half as much as 1,000 words in our data. You can extract a lot from videos. I would expect it's more than from images. Hopefully people come back to text at some point. Maybe all the way in the back. Yep.
As more and more governments seek to measure well-being, what do you think that, I work in the Norwegian government, so I work in the government myself. What do you think, what kind of lessons learned can we get from your kind of methodology of using this one compared to the more like traditional ways that we seek to measure well-being in the population?
I think the high-level advice is start data collection now. Data collection is relatively cheap, and without paying for it, you can't go back in time. Because you can only, you can buy, if you can throw money at Twitter and they'll give you whatever you want. But in part, Mexico is where they are right now because they just sort of spun up this data collection a few years ago. This takes like a week.
Are they allowed to store the data?
Sorry?
Are they allowed to store the data without paying?
Yeah. Well, I'm terms of use are a suggestion.
Okay.
What's the other thing? Oh, and the other thing is it very much augments, right? So in no world are we thinking that we're replacing government data collection. And the subtext here is that we're often working off data collection or Gallup data collection, right? So what this really is a set of methods to expand and sort of do nowcasting, increase the resolution in all ways. Think about it this way, right? So it's very much a sort of augmentation effort. Yeah.
This is on just that last point. So we have one county health rankings, and we're actually trying to get
cool.
that to, right,
Yeah.
And we're trying to get it at a disaggregated level.
Yeah.
I ran public health in LA County. It's a construct that is meaningless in terms of policy intervention, right? There's 11 million people. So the question for interesting, we learned from COVID that governmental data systems were not able to deal with the granularity and the place-specific nature of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And just the temporal lags and CDC's inability to connect locally.
Yeah.
So I actually think the question on this one was, can it, at least in large metropolitan counties, can this disaggregate meaningfully, particularly to look at the micro ecologies of the kind of risk that we saw in COVID that are core to the population health thing. And second, is it reasonable to think about this really as in collaboration as the future of governmental surveillance systems? Because its predictive accuracy is compelling.
Yeah.
The cumbersomeness of the existing data systems.
But also the perception management, no?
Well, yes, the perception management. That's why the in-partnership was a magic wand that got rid of the perception.
Right.
Well, the NSA has been doing this for 20 years. Let's be clear.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. So your question about disaggregation. So we're down at the zip code level. So about 3% of social media has GPS tags. That number's been declining, thanks to Apple, which as a user I support, sort of making that harder to access. So for 2% of your sample, you get GPS tags. GPS tags you can then aggregate up arbitrarily, right? I mean, you can give a GPS tag to Esri, ESRI, whatever they're called, and they'll give you the exact sort of demographic composition of the house you're living in, if you want. Certainly we've run studies at the zip code level, but then we generally limit ourselves to like New York or an area like this. I don't know how happy you would be with zip code level information.
Yeah, for LA County or New York, Suffolk County, yeah. Right.
Big step. Yeah, and the other thing is what I didn't mention here is just the ecosystem of data aggregators that now exist. Right? It's sort of a little bit scary, right? So companies like SafeGraph, They are the people that buy your location data from cell phone providers, that connect data on the back end. These were the ones early in the pandemic. They were quite cooperative. That allowed it to create these bounding boxes of how many meters a person is moving based on their phone footprints. So that, I think, in terms of disaggregation, is the leading edge. Yeah. I think you had a question?
Yeah, in terms of language capabilities, so obviously you develop these models based upon English.
English.
And so...
Not Her Majesty's English.
You've got Spanish there.
Right.
So where are the limits?
Well, I should say that we've published about this. You don't want to be translating language models. It turns out that loses about 50% of your predictive accuracy. You want to recreate a language model in a new culture because there's a lot of connotations. Family means something very different to a Mexican than it does to an American. So you do have to do a language model recreation effort in every language and culture. Order of magnitude, $10,000. That's all. And know-how. You need some know-how, but that's all published. Yeah. I think as academics, we tend to focus on the limitations in terms of, but language use is different. The fundamental function of language is to be interoperable. I'm talking to you right now, right? We've never met through language. So we have trained models on Facebook, on 2010 Facebook, to detect depression from language. And then we've taken them to oral histories from World Trade Center first responders. And it works beautifully. Why does this work beautifully? Because it's language, right? And so it's part of the reason I have always put an emphasis on avoiding what I call Twitterology, which is overfitting on things like hashtags, @mentions, retweets, like these platform-specific markers. Facebook likes is a good example. I would forego those in favor of the language we all speak. First question. The other question is, where are the biggest errors in the prediction models? My memory trace of your question. Where different languages are spoken. So if you look at Hispanic communities, if non-foreign born population aspects, that changes the language structure, and that changes or introduces errors into the model. Yeah.
What's the probability Amazon, Google, and Apple are using this with their assistants, with their passive listening?
To do what?
Just to run models in terms of prediction of purchasing.
I don't know. It wouldn't be hard for them. But I wouldn't underestimate that it takes a certain dedication to do this kind of work. And I now live close to these tech companies. They're constantly getting reorganized. Unless there's a mandate from the top to sort of build up a line of work and a set of expertise to do this, and unless it's not directly connected to some business use case, I don't see anybody toying around with that at scale.
Okay, just because obviously, if you're also a natural language processing model, you've also passive listening, basically an aid in a household.
Yeah, no, I 100%. Okay, we got to wrap up. Thank you so much.